Can you build a premium exhibition stand in less than 10 days? Well, we had to. Some materials were unavailable, the design needed adaptation, and there was almost no room for delays. But the finished stand couldn't look rushed. So here's what happened. This was a 42 square meter stand for Naked Wolfe and NOKWOL at CIFF 2026 in Copenhagen. The stand was located at Bella Center Copenhagen and was open on 3 sides. It was shared by 2 footwear brands, so the space needed to feel connected as one exhibition stand while still giving each brand its own clear identity. Just for reference, we received the initial request on July 17th, signed the contract on July 21st, and the build-up started on August 1st. So once the project was officially confirmed, we had less than 10 days to adapt the design, source every material, prepare graphics, arrange furniture, organize transport, and get everything ready for installation. And at the beginning, we genuinely thought we might already be too late. The client already had a design concept, which normally makes things easier, except there was one problem. The design had been created without taking into account the fact that we had less than 10 days to actually build it. At that point, the question was no longer, can we reproduce every detail exactly as it appears on the render? The question became, how do we preserve the character of this design using materials and systems that physically exist right now? And that became the key to the entire project. Originally, the stand was supposed to have an olive green color palette. It looked great in the concept. Unfortunately, apparently every olive green exhibition carpet in Europe had other plans.
Do you have any olive green carpet?
Searching database for olive green stock. No olive green in Paris or Rome. There is none in Europe. Here is what we have.
Everything close to what we needed was on a lead time of around 3 weeks, so waiting was obviously not an option. Instead of trying to force the original idea at any cost, we changed the process completely. We first found a carpet color that was actually available, a strong blue, and then rebuilt the stand's color palette around it. That became the new starting point for the design. And this is probably the biggest reality of last-minute exhibition projects. You can still create something beautiful, but you need to be flexible enough to work with what is physically possible. You cannot order materials that do not exist in stock. No amount of project management can negotiate within a 3-week production lead time. The original design also needed structural adaptation. With more time, we could have introduced more custom construction, but custom production simply wasn't the smartest route for this timeline. So the entire stand was redesigned around our modular system and, more importantly, around components we already had available. Modular systems are incredibly useful for projects like this, but they have their own fixed dimensions and technical limitations. That meant we couldn't just take the original design and recreate it centimeter by centimeter. We adjusted proportions, reinforced certain areas, and changed some construction details so the stand would remain stable and look intentional rather than improvised. The central wall became the visual divider between the 2 brands. Around it, we created 4 product pedestals for footwear, branding elements, 2 televisions, and a small high-table meeting area. The construction itself was relatively straightforward. The materials were not. 2 sets of product pedestals needed completely different finishes. For one brand, the client wanted a marble appearance. For the other, the pedestals needed to visually connect with the blue carpets, but instead of simply printing them blue, the idea was to cover them with velvet. And this was something we had never done with this modular system before. Normally, we use printed banner fabrics because we know exactly how they behave, how much tension they need, how they fit into the profiles, and how graphics interact with the material. Velvet was different. We had the material in front of us, but until we actually tested it on the structure, we couldn't be completely sure how well it would stretch, whether the finish would remain smooth, or how branding could be attached without damaging the fabric. And remember, there was no second week available for experimenting. so we tested everything immediately. For the logos, we also used special textile stickers with extremely strong adhesive for the first time. Fortunately, the experiment worked. Actually, it worked better than we expected. The velvet became one of the strongest visual elements of the finished booth. It photographed beautifully, looked premium in person, and added a tactile quality that you simply don't get from standard printed graphics. Sometimes a limitation forces you into a solution you probably wouldn't have tested otherwise. And sometimes that solution ends up being one of the best parts of the project. Everything was prepared in Poznań. During the final week before departure, the project essentially came together piece by piece. The carpet was sourced, furniture was confirmed, televisions were arranged, graphics were prepared, the modular construction was allocated, and the velvet elements were tested. Some graphic files also needed our help. For example, the marble texture for the pedestals wasn't ready for production, and there simply wasn't time to create the entire new visual from scratch. So we worked with the files and materials available, adjusted them, and prepared a print that would still look convincing at full scale. Thankfully, there wasn't an enormous amount of printed graphics on the stand. Even so, we collected the final prints on the same day the vehicle was being loaded. That tells you roughly how much buffer time we had. Almost none. We were also lucky with the timing of the exhibition itself. Early August is not the busiest part of the production season, which meant we could fit the project into the schedule. But yes, it still required weekend work. Last minute does not necessarily mean chaotic, but it does mean that every day matters. Once everything was ready, the complete stand traveled from our production facility in Poznań to Copenhagen. The journey took a full day and included a ferry crossing. The stand itself arrived without any major logistical problems. The people traveling for dismantling had a slightly more interesting experience. They were supposed to fly to Copenhagen on an early morning flight. The flight was cancelled, and the alternative offered by the airline simply would not get them there when we needed them. So the plan changed immediately. Instead of flying, they got into a car, drove towards Denmark, and crossed by ferry. Fortunately, they had been scheduled to arrive with an additional day of buffer time before dismantling. That spare day suddenly became very useful. And this is another reason why buffers matter so much in exhibition work. Sometimes everything you control goes perfectly, and then an airline cancels your flight. We had 2 full days for installation at Bella Center. Compared with the preparation phase, the actual build-up was surprisingly calm. Everything arrived, the construction went according to plan, and we had enough time to work properly rather than rushing through the final hours. I also have to give credit to the organizers here. The stand was located in a pavilion with a glass roof, but the air conditioning was running during build-up, which made the working conditions genuinely comfortable. This might sound like a tiny detail until you've installed an exhibition stand under a glass roof in a 36-degree heat without air conditioning. We have in Stuttgart. You remember those experiences. The most time-consuming part in Copenhagen actually turned out to be the floor. Instead of roll carpets, we were working with 50 by 50 centimeter carpet tiles across quite a large area. So every square had to be positioned individually. It took time, but the advantage was precision, and visually the finished floor worked extremely well with the rest of the stand. No exhibition project would be complete without one completely unnecessary technical problem. This time it was the televisions. Everything was installed, the screens worked, and then they refused to recognize the video files from the USB drive. After checking the formats, the files and the televisions, we eventually discovered that the problem was much simpler. The USB drive itself was defective, so somebody had to make an emergency trip to buy new flash drives. New USB, same video, problem solved. Sometimes exhibition troubleshooting is extremely technical, and sometimes you just need a different flash drive. The venue itself was generally very builder-friendly. Access and unloading was straightforward, regulations were reasonable, and the overall installation process was comfortable. But dismantling gave us one final little mystery. We had left the flight case for the rented televisions in organizer storage. It was labeled correctly and should have been returned during dismantling. Except it wasn't. Nobody could find it. It wasn't registered in the organizer system either. After roughly an hour of searching, the case was eventually discovered, behind the wall of the neighboring stand. How it ended up there remains one of those exhibition mysteries that probably does not need solving. The important part is that we found it. Looking at the finished stand, you would never know how little time we had to prepare it, and this is probably what I like most about this project. The original design was adapted, the color scheme changed completely, the construction was redesigned around available modular components, and several materials decisions were made almost in real time. But none of those compromises made the finished booth feel compromised. The blue palette gave the stand a strong identity, the marble effect pedestals created contrast, the velvet elements looked unexpectedly premium, and the central division allowed Naked Wolfe and NOKWOL to exist as two separate brands while still feeling like a part of one coherent space. The client was happy with the result, the exhibition went well, and the final stand looked exactly as a finished exhibition project should look. Intentional, not rushed. So yes, last-minute exhibition projects are possible. We've actually completed projects with even shorter timeline than this one. But a short deadline changes the way you approach the entire process. You need quick decisions, realistic expectations, and most importantly, flexibility. Sometimes the perfect carpet color simply isn't available. Sometimes the original construction needs to change. Sometimes you discover a new material because the obvious solution is impossible. The goal is not to pretend those limitations don't exist. The goal is to find alternatives and still protect the quality of the final result. We'd like to thank Naked Wolfe and NOKWOL for trusting us with the project and for making decisions quickly throughout an extremely compressed preparation period. And if your company has an upcoming exhibition project, whether you've been planning it for 6 months or circumstances have suddenly left you with considerably less time, get in touch with Expo Stand Builder. We'll tell you what is realistically possible, what needs to be adapted, and how to turn the time you have into the strongest stand we can deliver. Because sometimes you don't get the perfect timeline. You just need the right solution.